how to get into Microsoft Teams when it disappears.
Got to do the welcome to country, Doug. So I'm not familiar with how those words go, but I will acknowledge the past owners of past owners of the land, both living and deceased. I think that I haven't got the real word, so hopefully that'll do. Yours, Al.
Oh, okay. I've just got to work out how to share the screen. What's everybody looking at the moment?
Your PowerPoint presentation, Al.
Oh,
Put it in presentation mode and you'll be all good.
Okay. When you're ready, how's that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Oh, look, thanks everybody, and I apologise for the delay. Technologically incompetent, that's all I can say. This is a presentation that I've modified from a practical session that we ran, or that I ran, I suppose, or we ran for a couple of Fortuna groups of people. What we did on the days that we ran it was mostly practical, and starting off with some simple note-taking exercises and getting more and more complex until we had something happen that was a significant and sudden and unexpected event, and just saw how people were able to cope with being able to take notes when they were under duress. And I think, apart from the fact that for the last part of the exercise, some people got a big fright because of what we did. It worked well and showed people, I think, that this is more complicated than you think. And what I'm going to try and do in hopefully in about an hour or less is just to explain how note-taking works in other organisations and how I've used that within CFA. So I've been a member of the Huntly Fire Brigade for over 30 years. I retired 9 years ago, but before that I was an investigator and investigations manager with DPI. I was responsible for managing all of the stuff to do with agricultural and veterinary chemicals and fertilisers in Victoria, and there are some laws that are applicable, including laws against spray drift and misuse of chemicals, and we used to have to take notes for the particular purpose of proving an offence and potentially ending up in the magistrate's court. Although there was an appeal to one of our prosecutions, and that ended up in the Supreme Court, and unfortunately I had to give evidence in the coroner's court in Gippsland after a 4-year-old child drank quite a dangerous herbicide that his uncle had put into a Gatorade bottle and took home from work and left on the veranda, and that was pretty shocking. There are a number of reasons that we need to take notes. Notes are really important because and I'll say this a couple of times through the presentation, notes are regarded as best evidence. And there's two sorts of, or there's more than two sorts, but primarily you've got best evidence, which is an original document or an original note or an original piece of equipment that you have got that shows something that you need to show. That's one sort of evidence, and it's taken as being as given by the courts and by other judicial authorities. The other sort of evidence is testimonial evidence, or one other sort of evidence is testimonial evidence. And that's the evidence you give when you're going into a court. You stand up. There are two parts to it generally. You give your evidence in chief, which is the stuff that you get led through by the people who are on your side, and it's all very simple because you've practiced it on a number of occasions. And then the other side gets a go at you, and that's ugly. And it nearly is always ugly. In just about every circumstance, if you make an accurate note of an event at the time that that event is happening, a court or any other judicial authority, whether it be a judicial hearing, a tribunal, or anything else, they'll give that original they'll give that original note made at the time much more weight than someone else's memory of the event who hasn't made notes. And there's a reason for that. Just before we go on, some people say, well, why don't we just have digital voice recorders? You get a 128 gig micro SD card and stick it in the machine and you can record everything that happens. I've actually tried to use a digital voice recorder for some things. I interviewed a bloke one day standing at the back of a header. The header was operating, or the engine was running at the time, and he made a number of admissions, including telling me that he'd lied, which was really interesting. Unfortunately, all you could hear was the header operating. So as soon as I left, I had to make notes of that conversation to make sure that those notes were admissible in evidence. I would have done it subsequently anyway, but given that the recording failed, it needed to be done as soon as possible. Any questions so far?
No, we've got none so far, Al.
Okay, I'll keep going. In CFA, I don't know whether anybody, apart from the two little courses that workshops that I ran with Dave and others from Fortuna Group, CFA doesn't appear to have any guidance about taking notes. So what I've done and what I've been doing is to base notes on best practice within Victorian government departments, and primarily it's the Victorian government department that I worked for, which was the Department of Primary Industries. Very few people who are asked to be scribes or note takers, we used to call them note takers in DPI, but scribes, penciler, note taker, you can use whatever term you like. It's an underrated role, and it's an underrated role for the very small percentage of times that those notes are needed. And I think if we've all been in the position where we've been asked to be a penciler or a scribe in the back of an FCV or at an IMT, and you wander around all day and you're following a sector commander or you're following a strike team leader, and I've done that, and you're taking notes and you're making sure it's absolutely, perfectly right as you can make it. And at the end of the day, nothing's gone wrong, and those notes never ever see the light of day again. And sometimes you feel a bit deflated sometimes, because here you've gone to all of this trouble making sure you've made as accurate a record of what happened during your shift as you possibly can, only for it to just disappear down the plug hole. And what that means is nothing's gone wrong. But in the odd time something goes wrong, that 0.1% of times when things go wrong, those notes that you've taken or I've taken on that day might be absolutely vital, because they might be the primary piece of evidence which actually shows what's happening if you've taken those notes accurately and they've been taken at the time of the event or soon after. And I'll just talk a little bit about that in a minute too. I always use a CFA logbook. Now that I'm not working, when I worked, I used a DPI notebook, and a CFA notebook is very handy because it's structured in a way that makes it easier for you to do your job. I've written that it can be accepted by the courts. It is only if it's filled in correctly, not just because of it's a red book with a cover and the pages are numbered. It's got a serial number in it, but if you've taken the notes correctly, there is absolutely no issue with that being accepted, not just because of what you've written, but also because of the structure of the book. So it's always best to use it, but if you can't, use whatever you've got to make notes. And there are examples in the judicial system of notes of an event being made on a serviette in a cafe, and that being accepted as best evidence by a court and being accepted into the court in that way. So even though I'm saying use a CFA logbook if you can, if you haven't got one, then use whatever you can to make and keep those notes as safely as you can. I assume everybody or not everybody maybe, but most people have seen a CFA logbook. They're the A4 red hardcover books. They're inside the front cover. They've got a serial number that's printed in there, and each page is numbered. And each page is exactly the same. They're printed as a table with some columns which are narrow and some columns which are wide. And in some columns, all you've got to do is put a tick or a letter. And in other columns, you get the opportunity to write what happened. So, as I say, I've always tried to use a CFA logbook, and I carry one when I go. If I go as a strike team leader, I'll carry my own logbook. I might not necessarily fill it in. It might be the note taker who fills it in for me, or on my behalf, I should say, because I'll need to clarify that later too. But it's just an easy way of doing it. It's set up to make the person who's sitting in the back left-hand seat or in the IMT, it's set up to make their job easier. So this is the book. You can see nice hard cover, makes a nice easy back rather than a soft cover like the forest fire management ones, unless they've changed. Soft cover makes it hard because you haven't got really good backing to lean on, whereas the hard cover makes it easy. Mine's number 90,104, and that's a number that needs to be recorded at the end of the day. And each page is set out like this. That's a new one that I started, and page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 had stuff written on them, so I decided to do page 7 because I didn't want you to see what I'd written about the events that I was at. So it's pretty basic and pretty straightforward. You only need to write the date. If you're starting a shift, you only need to write the date once or when the day changes. Now, the only time that you'd record it twice in a shift is probably if you were doing a swing shift, or you're doing a night shift, which perhaps starts at 8 o'clock at night and goes till 8 o'clock in the morning. You'd record the fact that the changeover occurred at 12 midnight. In and out is whether the information was coming into you or into your lead officer, whether that's your strike team leader or your sector commander, or if you're taking notes, for your crew leader, or you might be the ops officer's scribe, or whether they're giving information out. The column that says TRV is pretty self-explanatory. One's by telephone. You write a T if it's by telephone. You write an R if it's by radio, and you write a V if it's by voice. So if the person's speaking to someone, a V goes in there, and you would tick the out column. So that means the person was speaking to someone. The name of the person involved, who it was to, because we know who it was from, and then what the details are. Now, it might be an instruction that was given. It might be an issue that's arisen. It could possibly be that there's a difference of opinion between maybe a CFA sector commander and maybe some contractors who are doing some work. And down, as an example, down at the Cobor fire a few years ago, the strike team that I was leading was tasked with following a dozer trail about 4 k's through the bush and doing a backburn. The trouble is the dozer trail was too narrow to turn tankers around on, and they hadn't put any turning points. And I said to the people, actually it was the ops officer who was asking us to do the job. I said, well, we can't, because if we go in there, it's very thick. You can't turn the trucks around. They're going to have to go right out to the other end. So that wasn't an argument, but it was a discussion we had, and that needed to be recorded. Because if something went wrong and we did go down there without raising some concerns, then there's no record of that conversation, or there would be only our memories of the conversation, and our memories aren't perfect. I'll just say something about memory too, and we'll get to it in a minute. Have a think about, does your memory of an event fade as time passes, or does it get more detailed? Now, I don't ask the question because I don't know the answer. I do know the answer, but it's not necessarily the answer you expect, and we'll deal with that in a minute. They're the logbook columns, but we don't need to go into those unless anybody's got a question about them. Any questions about the columns?
I got nothing there. Alan, no questions at the moment, unless someone comes on.
Yep. Okay. I just got a note to tell me there are people waiting in the lobby.
Yeah, we'll look after that. Don't you worry about it.
Okay, because my house doesn't have a lobby. Okay. I won't go through that either because we've just done that. And we will go into the details soon. There's a word that you don't see very often written down, and the word is contemporaneous. They're the notes we need to take. They're the notes that are the ones that are accepted by the courts as being best evidence. So it's not just any notes that are regarded as being contemporaneous. It's an accurate and truthful record of an event or incident made at the time of an incident or event or soon after. That's what you have to do. And when you get questioned, if it ever came to that, one of the questions you'd be asked is, when did you make these notes? And as soon as you say the words at the time of the event and as it was occurring, that really blows the wind out of the sails of just about everybody else, because then all that's left is for them to try and prove that somehow you made a mistake in the notes. And that's very difficult if you've made the notes and they are, over a period of time, proven to be an accurate record of what happens, and it builds up to an accurate record of the whole event. So it's not just as simple as making notes. There's a special sort of note called contemporaneous notes, and there is a legal basis for it. And I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but I did do some training with Charles Sturt University through DPI into investigations management and practice, and this is the information they gave us, and I have looked it up, and it is correct. They are there. The Australian Law Report Commission 26 Volume 1 and Regina versus Van Beelen, which was a court case in South Australia. And that's taken as precedent. In those courts, that was taken as precedent. So what they ruled was a ruling for the whole of Australia. The bit that's important is the bit that's down the bottom, and I'll just try and shift this other thing here so I can see it. What it's saying is the further after an event that you write the note, the less reliable it is regarded, because it's considered that your memory of the event's no longer fresh. Now, it doesn't say that you've forgotten stuff. And that's where this issue of what happens after an event occurs and you're trying to recall what happens. And here's the rub. The more often you try and remember something that happened in the past, you actually you embellish it. And the reason you embellish it is because you've got to recall all of the bits of that event from your memory. And sometimes there are other little bits from other events that come in and get added to the memory of that event. So rather than your memory of the event getting less and less detailed, in lots of cases, for lots of people, the further from the event that things happen, their memory is actually more detailed of it, but it's not accurate. And it's not accurate because they're bringing in other little bits of information from their memory, but they don't know they're doing it. That's the thing. It's not something that they're doing on purpose. So contemporaneous notes made at the time of an event or soon after, and even though it says the memory cannot be fresh after 24 hours has transpired, you wouldn't want to be saying in a judicial setting, when did you make those notes? And the answer was, oh, I did them the next day because it was convenient. Preferably, the best thing you can say is, I made them as it was happening. And that's going to be accepted with a huge amount of weight to it. So yes, make it while it's happening. If you can't make them while it's occurring, if you can't make your notes as it's happening for some reason, let's say a fire truck that you're assisting takes fire and you have to get out and help, well, you can't be writing your notes while you're doing that. And, you know, if someone's injured, you might be conducting first aid, and maybe an hour later or so when the ambulance has come and the ambulance has taken the person away, you think, oh, geez, I probably should sit down now and think about what happened with all that. But there's enough delay to make it, to warrant you sitting down saying, start the next line, and you say, these notes, the notes following were made at whatever the time was, which is however many minutes or an hour or whatever after the events occurred, for the following reasons. I was putting the fire out and conducting first aid, and made the notes as soon as I could after the ambulance left. There's no point hiding anything. And the reason there's no point hiding anything, as I've seen happen time and time again in court systems, you always get found out. And you always get found out and you look silly, but it's worse than that. If the other side can prove that your notes aren't accurate, and they only need 1 or 2 examples and get you to admit they're not accurate, then your notes aren't as good as you thought they were, and they might not be as good as the court thinks they are. And that's a significant thing. I can't hear you.
I think someone needs to go on mute. I'll just find who it is and.
Yeah, I can't hear them. I can hear something.
No, keep going, Al.
Okay, thanks, mate. Here's the basic stuff. Use a pen, preferably black. You can use blue. Don't use green. Auditors use green, and don't use red. And do not use a pencil under any circumstances. What you're trying to prove is that your notes have not been adulterated. And if you use a pencil, then they can be erased and changed to suit whatever. So always use a black pen. It doesn't have to be anything special. When I'm taking notes, I use a particular sort of a pen that's got a pressurised cartridge in it, because that's what we used to use at work. And the advantage of the pressurised cartridge is that it will not only write upside down if you find yourself in that situation, don't know how, but it will write on any surface. And they need to be legible. Someone needs to be able to read them. So if you've got a scrawly hand, then you need to try and make it as neat as possible, because other people who aren't familiar with your scrawl might need to be able to understand what's happening. And in the end, what will happen to your notes is, if they're accepted into whatever it is that's happening, they'll be transcribed anyway. So there's a company in Melbourne called Court Recording Services. We used to take tapes of conversations down there and our notes down there, and they would send them back by secure email, all typed up and whatever else. But unfortunately, if there was mumbling going on or 2 people talking at the same time, you'd find this little bit of italics that said illegible or unintelligible if it was right, if it was spoken. So it was really quite difficult sometimes, and you'd have to go back over it and check it all. Don't people doodle, but please don't doodle. I've seen that many arrows and various other things in diaries and in notebooks and in CFA logbooks. And sometimes people write stuff out of frustration. And I remember somebody that I worked with, this was a freedom of information issue that came up. And we'd been dealing with this person who used to ring us up from Gippsland on a regular basis, complaining that the CIA, you know, when the aircraft jets fly over, you see the condensation trails out the back of them. He was convinced that's the CIA, and they're not condensation trails. He was calling them chemtrails, because they were the chemicals the CIA was spraying us with, so we would all think what they wanted us to think. Somebody had written on one of the pages in a yellow sticky note, this bloke is an absolute something wit, and made some other comments. And somehow he complained that we weren't doing our job, and he wanted copies under freedom of information. And generally under freedom of information, you just hand over the file to somebody who photocopies it. Unfortunately, they photocopied the page with the little note on it, and the person got it. Somehow it went through the process and it didn't get redacted. He got the copy, and that person who wrote that note found themselves in a whole mess of trouble. just write the notes, write the facts. Don't write your opinion. Just write the notes that relate to whatever is happening. It's absolutely important. And don't be over flowery either. Write as briefly as you possibly can, except in the cases where you're trying to write down exactly what someone said because you think it's important. And I'll talk about that in a moment too. Any questions about that?
Silence is gold, Nell. Someone in the background?
Is everyone awake?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. When you get into the FCV or you get into the FOB or you get into the IMT, ICC, sorry, and somebody says, right, can you take notes for the strike team leader or whatever? You say, oh yeah, I can do that. They give you the notebook, and you're off. So the first thing you do is draw a line. You don't start a new page. There's no reason to start a new page. Draw a line on the line directly underneath the one that's been finished by the previous person, and start off by writing who your lead officer is. It might be strike team leader, sector commander, ops officer, whatever else, what your name is, where you're located. If you write the aerial call sign of the sector commander's vehicle or strike team leader's vehicle that you're in, and the time and date, and you can start your notes. If you're in a building, if you're in the ICC or you're in the LCF or wherever it is you might find yourself, just record what its role is. You know, it might be a level 2 incident control centre, or it might be level 3. And we're located at the Huntly Fire Station in the LCF at the, I don't know what the Creek Fire was called last year. I've forgotten what it was called. The Bendigo Creek Fire, and the name of my lead officer is Group Officer Patterson. And then begin your notes. Don't draw another line, just start writing your notes. So all that's doing is setting up, and for anybody that sees it later, and the unfortunate thing about this, if something goes wrong, they won't look at it the day after or the week after or probably the month after. It might be 6 months after. So it needs to be put into context. Who was there? What were you doing? Who was your lead officer? What was their role? And what time and date did you start? And that starts to help people work out, okay, is this relevant or not? Did it happen at the time of the incident, or was it after it, or was it before it and they were finished before it happened? Whatever. It all helps to put things into context. There's no simple set of instructions for saying what do you actually record. But the first paragraph is as good as I can get. You make accurate notes throughout the event or incident of everything that was instructed, seen, found, heard, done that is relevant to the event. Now, that doesn't mean you record everything that happens. If you recorded every time a tanker said they were going for water, you would spend 50% of your time writing Huntly tanker went for water, Huntly tanker back online, or whatever other tanker it is. It's not relevant to the event unless there's something unusual about it, unless it's something that's out of the ordinary. So if they've gone for water and they've got a flat tyre and they can't get back, well, that might be important. So record it. They're offline for a while. Or if they're going to go for water and they tell us that if there's no other tankers around and if one's not here in a couple of minutes, the fire's going to get away, that's important. But the mere fact that they're going for water is not important, because that's what they do anyway. If you're empty, you go and get it. So there's no reason to keep writing that all the time. The other thing that happens sometimes is, and I've had this happen to me, you're with a sector commander and you're writing notes, and he goes and talks to somebody and said, don't write this down. Well, you can't do that. They cannot do that. It's unfair on you, because it might get found out that they had a conversation that you didn't record, and that calls your notes into question. And as I said before, it all builds up a picture of your notes. If they've called that into question and they've called something else into question, then there could be a problem. Now, I'm not saying if someone says to you, don't make a note of this, I wouldn't disobey them. I just simply write, Sector Commander Patterson had a private conversation with Strike Team Leader Peyton. I've recorded that it happened. I just haven't recorded what happened. So no one can pull you up on that because you've actually made a record of it, of something that happened, and that it was a private conversation. I don't think anybody who asks you not to make a note of that would have a problem with that sort of approach. They certainly might have a problem with it if you followed them around and you wrote what they said despite the fact that they said not to. And despite the fact that it is you might be writing a true and accurate record of the event, you do have to work with this person. So there is a bit here that requires a bit of, what's the word, a bit of thinking on your part. It doesn't happen often. I can't remember the number of times, but it would have happened rarely for me. Certainly never happened at work, because that can't happen. Your logbook's got 200 pages in it. You're not allowed to cut any out. Try not to miss one. If you miss one, you know, sometimes you're turning the pages and you think you've just turned one page, you end up turning 2 pages. I always check a couple of times that I'm not now, that I did it once. You need to put a cross through the page and write why it's been left blank. I get it, you know, it's going to be embarrassing. Left blank because I turned 2 pages, but you're telling the truth and it leaves no gap for you to be questioned. What they're worried about is if you inserted something or removed something. That's what's the worry. Don't leave spaces. Don't leave pages blank. Don't leave any spaces greater than 1 letter between words or blank lines between entries. Every line has to have something written on it, and you don't want to leave, you know, half a line of gap unless you're moving on to the next entry, and that is okay. When you're recording orders or instructions, so if your strike team leader orders or instructs the strike team to black out along an edge because there's a wind change coming, don't just write black out along the edge, put it in context, because there's a wind change coming. It's not an opinion, it's what the strike team, what your strike team leader said, and it's an accurate representation of what happened. So this is all about trying to make what you're doing as open and transparent as possible and eliminating any possibility that something might have been done to change the notes that had been made. That's what we're doing so far. This is what we've been talking about. Inward and outward radio, telephone and voice messages. Sometimes it gets very busy. And if you've ever been a note taker or a penciler or a scribe, you'll know that sometimes it gets awfully busy, particularly at the end of a briefing, and your lead officer will go and give a briefing to the other people who are there. It might be the other crew leaders, or it might be everybody. So you've got 40 people standing around and people are asking questions. Some of them are relevant to the event, so you want to record them. Some are not relevant to the event, so you're not even going to bother. But there's a lot going on. Now, you know, the temptation might be, oh, look, this is just back at the staging area. We don't need to record this. Well, you just never know. If you think it has a bearing directly or indirectly on the event, then you need to record it. And we record everything. We don't just record stuff that relates to us. We record stuff that we might hear on the radio that might relate to someone else. So we might hear an aircraft, you know, and if you're a sector commander, the sector commander's in control of the aircraft in their sector. So you might hear an aircraft talking about a stag, or talking about a falling tree, or whatever else. Just because it's an aircraft doesn't mean you don't need to record it. Just because it's a bulldozer working for forest fire management doesn't mean you don't need to record it. You do. And this is where it sort of gets a little bit messy, because it's even though AIMS is quite clear that if Dave Patterson is a sector commander, then everything that's happening on his sector is under his command, and it doesn't matter whether it's a bulldozer, it doesn't matter whether it's a skidder that's removing trees, it doesn't matter whether it's tree harvester, 40-ton tree harvester, it doesn't matter whether it's any other piece of equipment, it belongs to him. Now, trying to convince those people that they belong to him is probably the biggest issue. You might never do that, but the person taking the notes needs to take the accurate notes of that event, including from their point of view, the contractors, people from other agencies, all those sorts of things. And this is what I was talking about before. Don't report the regular routine tasks that are expected to occur. People break for lunch. They go and get water. They have a toilet break. You know, you don't need to write those unless they're out of the ordinary and unless they have an impact directly or indirectly on the incident. Mostly they don't. You know, the fact that I go to the toilet has very little bearing on whether a fire gets put out or not. So it's important for the person taking the notes to use their discretion to, and this is the art of it, I suppose, the bit that you can't write down or tell anybody. The art of it is working out what do you actually take a note of and what are the things you can ignore. What's the dross that can just go away from the vehicle in the air? If you don't use abbreviations, you will not keep up. It's as simple as that. And you can use any abbreviations you like. There's a whole heap of standard abbreviations, but you can make up your own ones. But if you're going to make up your own ones, write down the first time you write it what it actually means. Because if you just made it up on the day and you've never used it before, but you've used it a bit on the day, 6 months later when somebody says, oh, what does that mean? What does a W with a line at the top of it mean? Well, you might not know. So as it happens, W with a line at the top of it is a standard abbreviation for the word with, and it's easier to write than with. It's very simple. There are some examples here of common abbreviations. Now, in the work that I used to do, IS and HS, I said, he said, it saves you writing I said and then writing down what I said, and he said and writing down what he said. It's IS, HS. And we write down SC for sector commander. It's simple. It's the role that's important, and the role will be listed in the incident shift plan. So all someone needs to do is get the incident shift plan and see who the sector commander was on that day, at that time, in that sector, and they will know exactly the person they should be talking to. So try and be as clever as possible when it comes to this. All of those abbreviations, you know, between, because, etc. is pretty straightforward. Especially all those ones you can use, providing you can remember what they mean, and those are pretty much standard ones. But if you're going to make up your own, as I said before, just write it down somewhere. The first time you use it, just put it in brackets after it, and then from then on you write. Because 6 months later, you might not remember it, but you wrote it down on the day. If you make a mistake, and you do make mistakes, you start to write something down and it just doesn't make sense. And you think, what am I going to do? I've got a ballpoint pen, I can't rub it out. I'm not allowed to rub it out. And what you do is what I've done down the bottom. Simple as that. You put a single line through it so that the mistake can still be read when you've put the single line through it, and you don't do what I've done on the right, which also says how not to delete an entry underneath it, but you can't read it. It's about openness and transparency. Yes, I made a mistake and I've deleted it. Make sure you initial it and date and put the time on it. You won't need the date because you wrote that at the start. But just initial it, and so someone knows it's actually you that did it, the person making the notes, and not someone else who decided that they just didn't agree with it. Any questions?
No, everyone. Not yet, Alan. I think they're all asleep, maybe.
I'll keep going anyway.
There's one in the chat column from Chris Simmons too. Yeah.
Oh, can I hear it? I can't see it. How do I see it?
What he said was you're talking about notes and what to do, and he said old pilot's axiom: the shortest of notes outlives the longest of memory.
True. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And that's what this is all about. And even though I said it in much more words at the start, that's exactly what I was trying to say. An accurate note beats anybody's memory any day. Thank you for that. Is that Eric?
It was.
Oh, thanks, mate.
That's all right. Just for you.
Thank you. Don't leave blank spaces between words. Don't leave blanks, then try and fill them in later. I tried to do that once and I didn't use the 3 or 4 lines that I'd left, and I was left thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? And I had to put a line through the line and wrote line left intentionally blank. It shouldn't have happened. Write it down as it happens. Don't use correction fluid. It's an absolute no-no. It's for the same reason that a pencil can't be used, because if you rub that out, it will be found out. Can you draw a diagram in your notes? Of course you can. Now, you shouldn't need to, because everything should be pretty straightforward, and you will get an incident shift plan, hopefully, if it's a decent sized event, and it will have things like it's talking about there, incident structures. You'll have a map of the fire. You'll be told where the water points are. But if something happens locally, and let's say a tree falls over the back of a truck or something like that, and people are trying to recover it because they want to get it out of the way up front, it might be handy if you just sit down for a sec and in your notes, in your notebook, you just simply draw a little diagram that shows where the track was, where the truck was, where the tree was, and put that in and just explain what it's about.
Sorry, Alan, just a question. We've got a question from Andy Dunallen. If you were doing a night shift, would you continue on from the date that was started, or would you leave a line and start a new date? I think you covered it, but I don't think Andy came in at the time.
No, you keep writing and just change the date. Night shift is one of those events where you'll only need to write the date twice. You'll write the date once at 8 o'clock at night when you start, and from then on you'll write the time until midnight, and then the date will just change and the time will change, and you'll just keep going line after line after line. No blank lines in your notes.
I've got another question from Claudia. Hang on. Can you take photos to back up your notes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you take them with a digital camera, which nearly everybody does now, there will be metadata attached to that photo, which will tell the time, date and GPS location that it was taken at. And you can refer to the fact that you took a photograph in your notes. So it's not a problem. It used to be a problem 15 or 20 years ago when digital cameras first came in and the courts hadn't caught up because they wanted hard copy photos. But with the metadata that sits behind every photo that you've taken on your camera, or on your on your phone, or on your digital camera, of course you can do that, but refer to it in your notes because it'll be a reminder to you too that you've got it. Now, some of those photos, if there's been an incident or an accident, some of those photos might be not for wider circulation, and I would be reporting not just to my lead officer, I'd certainly tell my lead officer, listen, I took some photos of this and they might be useful later on. Lead officer should tell the incident controller that there are photographs of that and get them to them as soon as possible, because those sorts of things shouldn't be circulated. I'll continue. We're getting through this pretty quickly. You can refer to other documents too. For example, not everybody always, but you nearly always get a shift plan at the start of a shift. There's not many people write down that an incident shift plan was provided, but do that. And it will have a version number on it, that you can write down that you used incident shift plan for whatever date and whatever version it was, and who it was provided to. So it might only be provided to the crew leaders, it might only be provided to the sector commander or the strike team leaders. But just record that sort of information, because that goes to who had what information available to them. And that does have a bearing on the event. Okay, this is the difficult bit. First person notes of conversations. First person is when someone's talking to another person. So there are two ways you can write things down. Best practice is recorded in the first person, and that is you record exactly what they said as they said it, and exactly what the other person said as they said it in their words. This is really difficult and it's hard to keep up. The other way of doing it is what's called third person narrative, where you write it as a bit of a story. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Here we've got an example of first person notes up the top. So sector commander man comes up to strike team leader Watts and says, I want you to burn out the area between the dozer trail and the house. Watts, he says, oh, I'm not comfortable in doing that because the fuel load outside the dozer trail is too heavy and I think it'd be too risky to light up. Man cracks the sads. Well, I'm ordering you to burn that area out. It gives you a real sense of not only what the intent was, but the language that they used when they were saying it. Now, there's another way of doing it, and it's down the bottom in this slide, and it's the third person notes. Sector commander man instructed sector commander Watts to burn out the area between the dozer trail and the house. Strike team leader Watts said that the fuel load was too heavy and risky, but man told him to do it. Well, a more accurate record of what was said is up the top, but it's hard to do. There's no easy way to learn how to do it except practice. The easier way to do it is the bit down the bottom, and it's basically saying the same thing. It's just that it's not as accurate because you don't have the language to work out what the tone is that's being used, because it's a narrative. It's just a story. Whereas it's not just a story up the top, it's what they actually said to each other. And if sector commander man wants to use, how shall I describe this, florid language, write it down. If sector commander man tells strike team leader Watts to go and effing light up that effing thing, well, you write down exactly what he said without the abbreviation. And that adds more to it because it's exactly what he said or she said. I don't know whether it's a male or female.
We've got a question, Alan,
Yeah.
from Peter. Can you use what 3 words photo app on a smartphone? I'm not quite sure what that is. I'm not familiar with that one, but
yeah,
maybe Peter can explain it. Or
no, I've seen what 3 words. What 3 words isn't appropriate for this. Contemporaneous, believe it or not, with all the technology that's available, these handwritten notes are still regarded as the best evidence that can be provided to a hearing, a tribunal, a coroner, or any other judicial setting. These notes are the way it works. Now, I'm not saying that what 3 words won't be able to be used in the future, or that digital recordings can be used. It's just that sometimes there are too many things happening. You know, you've got your sector commander, you've got your strike team leader talking to the sector commander while the radio is operating and a helicopter goes overhead. Well, you know, what the hell went on then? Whereas you making the notes will work out what the most important thing is that's going to have an indirect or direct bearing on the event, and you'll make that decision. Now someone's got to make that decision, and that's your decision. That's why this is a really important job, making notes, because you've got to work out what are the things that I actually need to record and how I do it. It's busy. We're getting towards the end. So we've been taking notes all through the shift, and we're just about finished. Let's say you've finished off, you're 3/4 of the way down the page. and you've actually finished. You're not going to go out any longer. You're back in the staging area or the camp or wherever you are. You print your name and then sign and put the date and time on the next line. Now, the other thing you should do is take a photo of, if you can, you might have 10 pages. If you've got your camera or your phone, take a photo of each page and record and keep it safe. So you've got a copy of it, because what's going to happen here, unless it's your book, unless it's your logbook, and it's the one that was in the FCV or it's the one that was in the ICC, you're not going to see it again. And if someone says, "What did you write?" well, you might not have much of a chance to think about it. But if you've got a copy of it, if you're in an ICC, you can do it on a photocopier, but you probably can't do that in an FCV. So just make sure you've got some sort of record of the event you're at, in your own diary or in your own notebook, the date and time you were there, who you were working with, what your role was, and most importantly, the serial number of the logbook that you use, because only one logbook has that serial number. In the logbooks, when we started off, we're talking about each page is consecutively numbered. I'd also prefer each line to be consecutively numbered too, because when it goes pear-shaped and you're in the court, someone from the other side will say to you, "I refer you to page 30, line 26." Well, our logbooks aren't line numbered, and that delay while you search for line 26 builds up anxiety. It shouldn't, but it does. If you're being cross-examined and you're not anxious, there's a problem. I don't know what it is, but there's a problem. Yes, photograph each page, photocopy each page, and keep it safe, because, as I say, unless it's your diary, unless it's your logbook, you will never see that again. I filled in a logbook down at the Garfield fires last year. I've absolutely no idea where it is and what's happened to it, but I know the serial number of it if somebody ever asks. Now, whose notes are they? I've had a discussion with someone about this 12 or 18 months ago. The answer's clear, and I've spoken to some people who still work for DPI, and it's the answer they gave me, and it's the one that I thought was the one we should be using. So I'm the note taker for Strike Team Leader Patterson. Whose notes are they? And the answer is simple. They're mine. Now, sometimes the lead officer, Pato, might say, "Well, no, they're not. You made them for me. They're my notes." Well, no, they're not. You didn't make them. They're my notes. That doesn't mean they can't be your notes, but there's a way of doing it. And it should be done at the end of every shift. And if you as a note taker knows what this means, you can say to them, "I've made these notes. You can adopt them as your own if you like." All they've got to do is read the notes as soon as possible after the event, just like you did them as the event was occurring, so that their memory of all the events is fresh as well, and they know whether what you've written down is correct. So they read your notes, and then if they're happy with them, they read them and they say, "Yep, I agree with that." And underneath where you've written your name and signed your name and put a date, they write, "I have read the above notes. I was present when they were made, and I confirm that they are a true and accurate record of what took place. I adopt them as my own," and they sign and date it. Just like you did. That means your notes and the lead officer's notes are both the same, because the lead officer's adopted them. That's what we used to do in DPI. If we went out to do an investigation, one of us would be, we used to use different terms. One of us used to be the lead officer. The other one was the corroborator, to corroborate all of the stuff that happened, and the corroborator would take notes. As soon as we finished doing the job, as soon as we'd done the interview, as soon as we collected the samples, whatever it was that we're doing, we'd pull up on the side of the road, we'd sit down, and we go through this process in my green notebook or in his green notebook of going to the last page, signing it off, and then getting the other person to adopt those notes. Now, if they don't agree with everything you've written, there's a bit of an issue. It's either an issue in perception, they perceive things differently to you when the event occurred. There is a process where they can adopt only those bits they agree with. Now, that's unlikely to occur. What they need to do is to exclude certain notes, and that's where line numbers would come in handy, because the lead officer might say, I adopt these notes with the exception of page 37, line 16, and page 38, line 20, and then sign and date it. And then everybody is clear. They don't need to write a reason. They don't need to strike a line through your notes. There's nothing wrong with the notes that you made, and you can't help them not agreeing with them. And two different people might have two different perspectives depending on where they were standing, sitting, or whatever they were doing when the incident occurred. So that's not a problem, but the notes, after all, are your notes. They're not their notes unless they adopt them, and they don't have to adopt them all. And I hope that makes sense, because I don't know ever if I've seen a strike team leader adopt the notes of the note taker who was sitting in the FCV, and yet it's one of the prime tenets of the lead officer having their own contemporaneous notes. Otherwise, they don't have notes. They've got to rely on their memory. Secure the logbook. What do we generally do if it's an FCV? Leave it there for the next person. Lock the FCV, take the keys, give them to the next person. If you can't do that, sometimes you get told, leave the keys in the vehicle. Okay, well, if that's what you get told to do, that's what you do. If the logbook's part of the ICC, you can take it back and give it to some of the admin team who are working there, and there'll be a number of people there who can do that. What happens? Well, mostly nothing. As I said before, I don't know how many pages of notes I would have taken over the years. I did my job with DPI for 16 years. I would have filled up 15 or 20 notebooks, of which probably 20 or 30 pages out of all of those notebooks might have been relevant, might have been used subsequently. As I said before, the notes taken, contemporaneous notes, there's that word again, contemporaneous notes are regarded as best evidence. An original document in its superior form is called best evidence. And I can't remember the exact words that we used before, but a brief note's better than a long memory, which is the aircraft one that was given. That's an absolute Monty. It's absolutely true, and I've seen it in court situations. The difference between best evidence and testimonial evidence is important. If you end up having to give evidence in relation to something, so let's say there's been an incident that occurred while you were taking your notes, and you end up, there's a hearing of some sort, there's a judicial hearing, or there's a royal commission, heaven forbid, or something, you might be asked to give evidence, and they won't generally just take your notes. They want to hear you speak. So what you'll do prior to that, if things are working properly, is you'll meet with CFA solicitors, and they will take you through your evidence line by line, almost practicing. They won't put words in your mouth, but they'll take you through your evidence from your notes line by line. And when you get to court, or the hearing, or the commission, you should be well versed in what's called your evidence in chief. That's the stuff you give when your friends are asking you the question, the people who are on your side. Our lawyers will ask us questions. You never answer them. You talk to the presiding judicial officer. So there's a few tricks involved. One of which is, and it's simple, always remain standing even when someone says you can sit. unless you're in that sort of a setting. But in a court situation and you're in the witness box, stay standing. The defence lawyers will want you to sit, and because they want you to sit so they're taller than you. They're looking down on you. It's all about body language and that sort of stuff, and there's a whole range of other things as well. So you turn and face the person who's presiding at whatever you're at. So it might be the magistrate in the magistrate's court, it might be the coroner in the coroner's court, it might be counsel assisting in a hearing, or I've forgotten the word. No, it doesn't matter. Talk to the person who's presiding. Don't talk to the person who's asking you the questions, because you get sucked in. And it's not too much of a problem getting sucked in by our own people, but if you get used to talking to them, you'll end up talking to the defence or the other side, and that's when you can get sucked in. Don't talk to them. Let them ask you the questions. Don't ever look at them. Look at the presiding officer. So the first part of your evidence is called evidence in chief. Easy. They'll lead you through it. They'll ask leading questions even though they're not supposed to. The second part is where your evidence is tested, and it's called cross-examination, and it's nearly always hard. If you've got good notes and the notes are being relied on by the court and they can see that that's the case, they've got to prove somehow that you stuffed up. It's not personal. I've been told that by a defence lawyer after the case. It's not personal, but you know, they're going to try and do everything they can to make you look like a git, because if they can do that, they win. I've only had a really, really bad situation occur to me once in the Maryborough Magistrates Court, where there were about 15 eagles that had been killed by a farmer, and I did the analysis and I found the eagles and all that sort of stuff. So the evidence was cut and dried. I found the dead sheep that he'd baited. I found this chemical. I found the same chemical in the dead eagles, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. When I interviewed him, we interviewed him at the Maryborough police station, and he wanted the policeman present as his friend. You can have a friend present at an interview, because he didn't trust us. I don't know where that came from, but that's what he said. And in the court case, when it came, I went in, gave my evidence in chief. It was all very happy and joyful, no grief whatsoever. And then when the defence got up, they got up and they said, Your Honour, may I approach the bench with my friend? His friend is our friend, our man. So they approached the bench, a little bit of gossip going on. They come back and the magistrate says he's going to conduct a voir dire. That's a court within a court, because I had badgered and not just asked questions of his client, I had interrogated his client. And don't believe anything you ever see on the television where police are investigating or anybody else is investigating and they ask questions in an interview. It doesn't happen like that. You always go into an interview knowing all the answers to all the questions. Otherwise, you don't have the interview. So I was asked to leave. And I couldn't think what I had done that would be regarded as interrogation. Interrogation's a no-no. That's, you know, that's bordering, that's really getting towards the limit. Anyway, went on for a while. They called me back in, go into the witness box, and they said, he gave his ruling, and his ruling was that I hadn't interrogated the witness. And what I learnt later was the bit that he objected to was at the end of the interview, after he'd told me all this stuff that I knew wasn't true, and you cannot tell him, you can't call someone a liar in an interview, despite the fact you see that on television all the time. You can't call someone a liar, but what you can do is when you get to the end of all their evidence, you can say to them, Sir, I think there's an alternative version of the events, and here is what I think happened. And that's what I did. I think this is what you did. I think you baited a sheep. I think you laid the sheep out where the eagles were roosting. I think you did that with the intention of killing the eagles because you thought they were killing your sheep. That's what he thought was interrogation. The magistrate ruled that it wasn't. He got a big penalty. Tell the truth. Don't try and make stuff up, and certainly don't add unnecessary information, and don't lose your cool. Don't look at the defence side when they're talking to you. Don't get sucked in, because it's too easy to do and people get emotional, and when you get emotional you get anxious, and when you get anxious you don't know what you might say. And I've heard some terrible things said in courts and you think, oh God, this is not going well. So you've been in the witness box for about an hour and you're trying to remember all of the stuff that happens, and they're asking you some really complex questions, and you know you've got it written down in your notebook or your diary, but you just can't remember it. Well, there's a way of dealing with it. And if you've really tried, you can say to the judicial officer presiding, Your Honour, I have exhausted my memory and I am unable to continue unless I may refer to my notes. Basically, you're asking him, can I open my notebook and read the bit that you're asking me about? Normally what happens is, I've seen it, normally what happens is they won't comply with that at the first request. They want you to exhaust your memory as much as you can. In the end, you might ask again and you might ask again, and the presiding judicial officer might say, yes, you may refer to your notes. And that opens a can of worms, because depending on where you are, and it's in most judicial settings, once you refer to your notes in the court, because remember, what the other side's got is only your statement so far. You've made a statement before all this, and that's a brief summary of what happened. Once you refer to your notes, everybody gets copies of them. So all the stuff you've written, including the stuff you didn't want to write down in your statement, they all get. So you just need to be aware of that, because if you've written stuff in your notes that you don't want people to see, you shouldn't have written it in the first place. Oh, and that was just an example. Look, there's no recipe for this. All of the things that I've said are general in nature, and although I think they're pretty straightforward, I look at it from doing it for 16 years. I know how difficult it was when I started, and I know that it does get better as you do it more and more often. I just wish we had people who did this on a regular basis so they got used to it. And they don't have to be operational people. They don't have to be firefighters. They can be, if you like, some sort of broader brigade member who's done general firefighting so that they can be on the fireground. But I think that's the path we need to go down, because too often we think taking notes, you know, penciler or scribe, it's just sort of like a throwaway job. We just have to have that person in the back seat just to make sure they're there. No, it's really important. In 99% of the cases, it'll never be seen again. But in that 0.1% or whatever percentage it is, when something really bad has happened, those notes are absolute gold and critical to the outcome that occurs. So, yes, good luck. If you ever put your hand up to do it, good luck. Hope it goes well. And just remember, it'll get better the next time.
So we've got a question from Morlina, and I can probably answer this as far as our group is concerned. Is there an opportunity for a novice to be with someone who is experienced at taking notes at least once? From the Fortuna Group perspective, that is an option for us, and we would, if someone wanted to do that, we would provide that opportunity. I don't know about other groups, and maybe some of the other group officers are on might be able to answer that for us. But certainly with our group, that's the case. What I will do is anyone that wants to ask Alan a question, I'd like to do it by hands up though, because otherwise everyone will jump in. So we'll open it up for a few minutes to see if anyone wants to ask Alan a question. Nothing.
Silence.
They're either all asleep or you've done an excellent presentation, Alan. As Alan said at the start of this, we at the Fortuna Group, this was very much a practical exercise. it works extremely well as a practical exercise because it's almost real time. I think the one we did, we had radios and all sorts of stuff running, and the difficulty of it was increased as we went forward. So, and Alan's put this presentation together, and Alan ran the sessions for us. Jason.
Yeah, I just want to thanks, Al. It was really good presentation. I've got my notebook here, and just looking back at a few things, and picked up on a few things that maybe that I should have changed when we're writing in the notebook. Just for clarification, you've got the columns going across. You've got the date, in, out, TRV column, then the name, and then the details. On some of my notes, I've filled in the details and haven't gone underneath. When I change lines, I haven't gone underneath the name, and underneath the name's been blank, but I've just filled down further in that details column. And then on some other pages, I've gone right back underneath the name and just kept writing as a full line. What's the best way to do? Does it matter?
Look, so long as it's clear to the person who's reading it. I mean, the general rule is you don't leave lines and you continue directly underneath. Now, there will be gaps, because if your details that you wrote might go over 5 or 6 lines. So all the other columns aren't going to have anything in them for 5 or 6 lines. That's not an issue. So long as it's clear to the person who's reading it later and that it's open and transparent, there's not a problem, Jace.
Yeah. So and I've done it both ways. I've left the name in one section, then just filled down 3 or 4 lines, and then wrote another name, 3 or 4 lines in the details. And then in other areas, we've just written right across in the name and just kept going right across.
Yeah, so. and look, I understand that, and I don't think there's an issue with it, even though it should just directly follow on, but it's clearer to the reader if the next person who speaks starts on a new line.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what we've done, start on a new line with the next person. But yeah, no worries, thanks.
One of the things that often happens, and I think you might have touched on it, Alan, is that we quite often don't have our own logbook. We're using something that comes in the FCV or the ICC. It's quite appropriate for people to actually take photocopies of those notes and take them with them and keep them for their records, or photo, take photo on your phone or whatever. In fact, it's probably a good thing to do. So you've got a copy of them, because 6 or 8 months down the track, someone's looking for a logbook. Quite often you can never find them.
And if I can say, Dave, look, if nothing's happened, and it's been, and as far as you're concerned, it's been an absolutely innocuous event, then it's probably less important than if something actually did happen. And for example, when we're down at Malakuta this year, we had a member of our strike team who had a health check one day and was found to be seriously ill. You know how they do the health checks sometimes at large events. He went in. He had the health check with the AMBOs. He ended up at the school, at the Army hospital, and we had to evacuate him for his own safety. I'd certainly think, because you don't know what happens once he leaves. What happens to him once he's left your care and control and is headed back home? And you think, oh yeah, okay, well, he's on a RAF plane and it's going straight home. Well, in fact, it didn't. There were storms, and he ended up in Albury overnight, and he ended up somewhere else overnight and didn't get home for 2 days. Under those circumstances, when you think something may have happened, it's even more important to take photos of each of the pages of your notebook for that, for as long as you were there, or photocopies if you can. If you can get into the ICC or you can get into the local fire station and make photocopies of it, do it. Because as Dave says, 2 months down the track or 3 months down the track, and someone's asking you about it and they can't find the logbook, you don't want to have to be relying on your memory alone.
Mick Rogers.
Yeah, Alan, what's your interpretation of using a scribble pad for taking the original notes and then transcribing them?
That's not contemporaneous notes, mate.
No.
Your contemporaneous notes are what's on the scribble pad.
Yep.
Because my guess is you won't transcribe them word for word. You'll add stuff in and you'll change a few things that you thought, oh, no, that's actually not how it happened. Trouble is, that's after the event. That's after the event. So contemporaneous notes are designed to be made and kept and recorded at the time of the event or soon after, not, okay, I'm going to make some scribbly notes in this thing, and then when I get home, I'll write them up in a logbook. That's not how it's supposed to happen. And if someone finds out how that's happened, your notes, your evidence might all be for nothing.
Okay, Andy Donnellan. Andy, you got your hand up there, mate? You're on mute. No?
I think he might be waving at us.
Fair enough. All right, I've got no one else with their hands up, Alan. Look, thanks very much for that. That's extremely useful. There's a lot of comments coming through about people thought that was a great presentation and quite useful. We will, as we said, we've recorded it, and yeah, Andy's got his hand up again.
Yes, sorry, I didn't realise I was muted. I was just wondering, basically, I think it's already been answered anyway, but if you were at an ICC and there was a logbook there, would you use, and you had your own, would you use the ICC logbook for their records and then just photocopy it and put it in your logbook for later, or what would you do?
In an ICC, that's exactly, or not exactly, that's mostly what happens. The ICC has a continuous record of the event from one end to the other in the logbooks they keep. All you do is fill in your part of it. It's a different story when you're out with the sector commander or you're out in the field. You can use your own, or you'll use the one that's in the vehicle. But in the ICC, you generally use theirs and make photocopies of it before you leave, because you'll never see it again.
Yep, no worries. Thank you.
All right, I've got no one else with their hands up. Look, thanks very much, Alan. Much appreciated for putting that together. And as I said, all the comments have come back. That was more than appreciated, I think. So I think we'll close the meeting there. And thanks everyone for their attendance. And probably see you on the fireground at some point with Alan's comments in the logbook.
God, heaven forbid. Thanks, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Pato.
Yeah, thanks, Al.
Alan, thank you so much for that. That was really, really amazing. So I'll make sure that I share that with my fellow BASO team and anyone else who